models that would be that will sustain very good journalism and ethical reporting. And so right now, I think maybe, I would say that things are up in the air, and yes, the newspaper model is disintegrating. I agree. I think print seems to be on its way out. I wouldn't exactly, I'm not yet ready to call the last rites on it, but I do think that there are some viable models out there that are coming out that we haven't heard about. And I would say that, there are actually news services that have been out there for even maybe close to 5 or 6 years now that are trying to make up for the loss of reporting and quality coverage that that we've been seeing decline over the last year. So I wouldn't totally rule out that the internet can't fill in that vacuum. We had the Society of Professional Journalists Northern California held an expo, a journalism expo in Silicon Valley that was co-hosted by Yahoo, and brought together a couple of hundred journalists to actually look at that question. And it was quite surprising to see the number of enterprises and the new models of collaboration and new revenue models that they're cooking up that would not be solely advertising-based. And so I'm a lot less pessimistic than you are about what's going on.
Well, Chris, revenue is the key. ProPublica receives essentially outside donations, funding. The same with TruthDig. If you can't, reporting, especially if you do foreign reporting. The first year I was the Balkan bureau chief during the war in Yugoslavia. My first year budget for the New York Times was $600,000, and that didn't include salary. To do investigative reporting is, I just don't see where the money's going to come from to support it.
Yeah, well, actually, foundations are actually beginning to look at that more. And there are new cooperative models that are being proposed right now, business proposals that are being proposed right now that I know of, to deal with the issue of foreign reporting and also to deal with the problems of in-depth investigative reporting. In fact, my program is one of them. My program is actually aimed at developing more investigative reporters of color to pursue public interest journalism. And there are other programs like that that are just beginning to pop up all over the place. Now, granted, they're not going to have the kind of scale yet that larger news organizations have and are used to, but I think the actual the new theme here in terms of these new enterprises is actually smaller, faster, and cheaper, sort of like NASA, and I think that's the way we have to go.
Well, Linda, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue this discussion. We're talking with Linda Jue, former head of the Society of Professional Journalists Northern California chapter, Chris Hedges, a former reporter for the New York Times and now with the Nation Institute, and Bernard Lunzer, the new president of the Newspaper Guild. We'll be back in a moment. That was Greedy by the Brentford All-Stars. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Juan Gonzalez. We're talking about the state of the newspaper industry. Our guests are Bernard Lunzer, the president of the Newspaper Guild and the vice president of the Communication Workers of America. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Chris Hedges is a senior fellow at the Nation Institute. He spent nearly 2 decades as a foreign correspondent for the New York Times and is co-author of the new book, Collateral Damage. His latest article for Truthdig is called Bad Days for Newsrooms and Democracy. He joins me here in the Firehouse studio. And joining us on the telephone from San Francisco is Linda Jue. She is the director of New Voices in Independent Journalism and the past president of the Society of Professional Journalists, Northern California chapter. I'd like to get back to Bernie Lunzer. We contacted the Tribune Company to invite them on the program. They declined, but they did send us a statement. Gary Whiteman, the senior vice president of corporate relations, writes, quote, "We have gotten a great deal of attention for the actions we're taking at our newspapers to address the issues we and our peers face. Declining revenue, secular difficulties facing our major advertising groups, and the expansion of media choices available to consumers. Clearly, as you recognize, we're not alone. I would point out, however, that at the end of the day, we had the largest news gathering staffs in our markets and the second and third largest in the country in Chicago and Los Angeles. That is true even after implementing the staff reductions to which you refer." Bernie, your response, you know that Tribune has been at the center, at least in this latest wave of the various layoffs and buyout programs at the various newspapers.
Right. We're very concerned, and of course I've watched very closely what's happened at the Baltimore Sun, the loss of all the international bureaus and that kind of coverage, but it's important to note that what they're doing is having a great effect on local coverage as well. Great losses there. We think in many cases, the other day Sam Zell made the statement that he's not going to sell any more newspapers in 2008, but we think in some cases that it might be better if Zell were to consider selling more of the empire and breaking it off. We hope that local ownership would actually create more responsibility and more response back to the local market and to local communities that really are going to be the ones that are the biggest losers in this. We see, less is less, and we need to say that out loud. The subscribers are not fools. They can see that these products have been diminished. So you have this danger of getting into this cycle. We're hearing that Tribune Company is going to save journalism through all these cuts. That's not what we're seeing. That's not what we're feeling. We're feeling that basically it's just a self-fulfilling cycle of a downward spiral.
Oh, no. What about the old model was that these chains began to grow, Gannett, Knight Ridder, obviously the Hearst and Pulitzer chains earlier on in the century, but then you had these major media conglomerates across platforms. But now, apparently, many of these companies now are in trouble because they took on too much debt or because their shareholders are demanding a maximum return. What about the, right. You're saying that the return to local, more locally owned companies would solve the problem. What if those are just private venture capitalists, as they are in many of the instances now, private equity groups that are taking over these local publications?
Well, we can see that's not a great solution. Minneapolis is an example of that. Vista is a private equity firm that bought the Star Tribune, and that has not worked out well, and they're trying to, manage their debt right now. They've missed some payments. So there is a problem with the market, and we talked about alternative publications, but there is a real question as to whether or not we can build employee stock-owned papers, whether we can build co-op models. There are different models, and some of us are starting to believe that we may have to rescue newspapers from the market itself for these things to survive, for any quality journalism to survive.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's absolutely right. The ownership model is what the problem is. One of the things that I want to bring out is that the Northern California chapter of SPJ is beginning to conduct a study on the impact of coverage on the communities as a result of these layoffs from media news, beginning with media news, since that seems to be the most recent and most public layoffs. And we will be looking at other newspapers. But we are looking at the effects on the 29 communities because there really hasn't been any documented data on the reduction of quality of coverage. And of course, one of the questions that we're also looking at is whether or not journalists are willing to actually become owners of some of these newspapers themselves. So, I think the ownership question really needs to be addressed. And one of the biggest areas of coverage that is missing is the coverage of the newspaper buyouts and